Hello and welcome to the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast for November 6th, 2023. My name is Tom Luongo and we have a lot to talk about. We do have a lot to talk about, and every time this guy's on the podcast, we talk a lot, and it's awesome. It's episode 161, and I have back with me now a frequent guest on the podcast because every time Vince is on the show, crazily cool things come out. So now the other day, the inciting incident for this podcast was the other day, an article came out about Japan and them doing a quote unquote stimulus. And I took Vince mildly to task about his response to this, saying the kind of standard thing, oh, look, there's Japan like going to do this and is going to, fan the fires of inflation. And I said, well, actually, Vince, if you look a little closer, you'll note that they're doing tax cuts, part of the stimulus package. So this is, and then that started a Twitter conversation, which had some people like a little confused because Vince and I were disagreeing cordially in public, and that never happens on Twitter. So everybody was really confused. So Vince, welcome to the show, and let's get into it. How are you tonight?
Thanks for having me back. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back. This is fun. This is fun because this is therapy for men, right? We're going to say, you suck, you suck, Tom. Well, Vince, you're a moron. I want to be okay. Great. So let's have a beer. So I want to start it off to. We're going to touch. I think I know where you're going with this, and the whole concept of the biases that we bring to the table. What started this is I had done one of my snarky tweets, and I saw a headline. I read a couple sentences out of it, and I still stand by it being correct, but not for the snarky reason I said it before. But that's not important. What's important is I put out something like, they're putting out the fire with gasoline or something like that. I said something basically saying that Japan is controlling. Like the phrase in the article, this is the key that made me just kind of like have an involuntary tweak. It was Japan. I mean, obviously, this is the mainstream media not knowing how to phrase anything and just phrasing it for clicks. And the phrase was, Japan is going to fight inflation with stimulus. I'm paraphrasing, but it's a pretty good paraphrase. And I went, and then I read a little bit of it. And then later on, there's a sentence in there saying, and they're trying to fight deflation. I went, well, what are you trying to fucking fight, guys? And why is the word stimulus in the headline? So I went to my default snark, right? I went to my default zero hedge upbringing, and I went, fucking drove napalm on it, And I know I'm right. I know people are going to agree with me, and culturally, people will agree with me. So I just threw it out there, and then you said something. I didn't even know about that. You said it because I was, off doing something else, and then I was like, oh yeah, and I didn't read the replies. Basically, you made a reply, and you'll say what that reply was, and we're actually debate the concept. But apparently, a lot of people were just like filling in, going like, oh my god, Vince likes ice cream and he likes ice cream, but they're different flavors, and I didn't read those responses. I just saw your response and said, it's like, oh yeah, wait, let me check. Oh yeah, it's kind of right. I'll push back on that later, but yeah, it's not napalm. It might be a little bit of gasoline, but it's not napalm. I shouldn't be so harsh. And I said that, and people just couldn't fucking handle it. Right. Which is kind of interesting. There you go.
No, what I said is that Japan is they're always quote unquote fighting deflation. A kind of a structural deflationary problem, right? Because you can go into the demographics or whatever it is, and all the standard arguments about Japan. And what this came out of this conversation for both of us was I said, look, hold on, Vince. Like, they're going to cut taxes is their main part of the stimulus here. Right. So they're going to take money out of the government economy, and they're going to put it back into the productive portion of the economy, and that's the right thing. So. And then, and you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And like that, and this is what came out after this, folks, is that then Vince and I were chatting back and forth privately. And he said, dude, you uncovered like an unconscious bias that I didn't even realize that I had. I'm like,
that's what I said. Yeah.
Well, I'm like, dude, this is nothing new. We all do it. It's like, we all react to a headline. And what I said, and what I think is the most important thing for people to take away from this is that it was either Reuters or Bloomberg. I think it was Reuters.
Yeah, right.
And the art, and they wrote the headline in such a way to get that response from people like you and me.
Right. They
That's
mined
what
me for
they did that on
advertising.
purpose, because
Right.
their goal is to get you to read the headline, and or everybody to all the perma bears and the Japan perma bears to read the headline, do the Kyle Bass thing, and then move on with their day. When the reality is that this is a much more complicated and much more nuanced situation. And I have a patron who's been trading Japan for years, and he's the one who's helped re-educate me about Japan, because I had that
Right.
same bias for years.
Right.
And
Right.
then he walked in and he just started like dropping stink bombs on us, like
Right.
whole paragraphs and TLDRs on us about, you don't understand Japan at all. The
Right.
short Japan trade is the widowmaker trade. It has ruined more hedge fund managers. It's ruined more money managers than any other trade in the last 40 years.
Right.
And the Bank of Japan knows exactly what they're doing, even though it looks like they don't.
Right.
And this was the thing that, Vince and I talked about a little bit behind the scenes, and now we're talking about it again on the podcast. And it was like,
Yeah.
it for me, the minute I saw all of that, and he, and Vince's text to me later, saying, "Oh my God, here's this unconscious bias you uncovered." I said, "This is a podcast, because this is actually the story that we can do this in any idiom. Japan is
Right.
just one of them. We can talk about Palestine, Israel, and all of a sudden there are newly minted,
Right.
Middle East experts. It's like there are newly minted virologists out there, and there are newly minted this, and every other week they create another moment where everybody can feel smart because they have a little bit of knowledge, but then don't actually have any context to put it in.
The
And
brick,
most people don't know a thing about Japan.
the brick. I mean, I'm not going to get into this right now, but it's kind of funny. That's the bricklayer philosophy. I had a friend. I'm good at this, therefore I apply it to everything. So I had a friend, okay, and he had an '80s wedding band. This is going to tie directly into the concept of people think they're good at one thing and they broadly apply it to other things, and they're not aware of their own bias. Okay, so this is actually a joke, but you reminded me of it, so I want to bring it up before I forget it, before we get back to the meat of this. All right. So there's this '80s, these guys are like an '80s wedding band, and I used to hang out with them in Brooklyn. I lived in Brooklyn for a while, and we would go over there. I was like their roadie. I understood music, but I didn't play that much. And I would go with them, and I would go with them to the weddings, and I would get to drink free, and I get a free meal, and I just carry a couple drum kits and stuff like that. And one time we're there at the band leader's house, and he's a really good musician, probably Juilliard or something, piano and stuff like that. And he's sitting at the piano, and we're all in the living room, plastic slip covers on the couch. Parents are from Italy, and we're just sitting around there, and he's having a hard time with the piano. It's out of tune. And believe me, I'm talking about bias here. His father comes down the step. Now they're Sicilian, and the national anthem for Sicily is it's Solo Noi. It's not the national anthem, but it's like a love song, but it's more like an anthem, right? So he comes down the steps and he says, now, broken English with a lisp, okay? Christopher, please, what are you doing? He goes, Dad, I'm tuning the piano. Like the guy's a bricklayer, okay? All right. He goes, please move aside. I will fix it for you. And he sits at the piano. Now his son, fucking, Juilliard graduate or whatever it was, something out of fame, He's like, Dad, he's like, it's a piano. Don't you talk to me like this. I was a lay brick for 30 years. Don't you tell me how to tune a piano. I know how to tune a piano. And it was fucking hilarious because he walks away and we're all like giving him. His father walks away, and actually he ended up actually tuning the piano. I mean, he didn't do a good job. And then he has them, and they have good voices. Some of these guys. Then he has them, and he starts banging out the chords to this Solo Noi song, and it's just like Solo Noi, so it's us alone, and he's banging these chords like he's Bugs Bunny, and he's got his son who's got a tremendous tenor singing this ridiculous like anthem. Anyway, so when he left the room, it was like, well, I guess if you're good at bricklaying, you're good at everything. So if we're good at Europe or American politics, we definitely know everything about Japan.
Absolutely.
That's the
Absolutely.
punchline
That's
of the
just the way
story.
it works. And
Yeah.
dude, listening to that, it's so funny. Like the plastic slip covers on the couch and the
Oh
Brooklyn,
yeah.
because my family's from Brooklyn. Well, actually, we're my father's family's from Brooklyn. My mom's family's from Queens. So it's kind of the Montagues and the Capulets thing going on. You've got Northern
Exactly.
Boulevard versus Flatbush Avenue,
Right.
and oh my God. But like I'm listening to you talking, I'm like I'm flashing back to my childhood and I'm just
Yeah.
laughing because it's I know what that looks like.
Don't
I
sit. That's the
lived
good.
it my entire I lived like the first 20 years of my life, I just lived it all. Like and
Please,
it's just
Tomas, I tell you, do not sit on that couch. There's no covers on it. Sit. And I used to sit on the floor. Vince, sit on the floor by the coffee table, with a Coke or something.
yeah,
Anyway, so
absolutely.
that the topic is obviously is that you want to bring up is biases and how they affect our vision and analysis. I think
Well,
that's
and to
go with
remind
this.
everybody that mild disagreements between New York Italians, that's like breathing.
Yeah.
we don't
Oh yeah.
we yeah, that's just breathing, folks. It's not in any way, matter, shape, or form. Like if you don't push back on each other and have, shouting matches about, the most inconsequential things, we don't respect each other. Like this is just the way we communicate. And this is
Abuse
in many
hasn't.
ways, folks, this is the way Italians, especially from New York, say I love you. You
Right.
have to
Right.
realize this.
Abuse as an icebreaker. Never having to say you're sorry.
Exactly. So yeah, so the idea here is that it's just fun to watch that happen in real time
Mhm.
about a subject that everybody thinks they know so much about,
Right.
i.e., in this case, Japan. And we've, and I've had the same conversation in many ways with Alex Craner a couple of times because, a couple of times we've brought Japan's come up in conversation between me and Alex, and he's like, Japan's gonna, they're gonna have hyperinflation and their stock market's gonna go to oblivion, is gonna go to the moon. I'm like, no, their stock market's gonna go, well, they're gonna have an inflationary event and their stock market's gonna go higher, Alex, because eventually the BOJ is going to have to let go of yield curve control, which is, by the way, the other inciting incident for this, because that article came out that
Yep.
started this article came out a day or two after the BOJ finally officially
Right.
ended yield curve control.
It's a paired trade.
Yes.
That's what it is. Right. Fiscal and monetary coming at the
Right.
same time. That's right. That's right. Forgetting about what actually we differ on, and I think what
Right.
we differ on is kind of a neo-Keynesian difference in the sense of ultimately, I still think they're spending too much money,
Sure.
but you're saying they're at least spending money the right way. They're going from government to private to private.
Oh, they're starting the process. And the
no,
other
I'm
thing,
not arguing with that.
yeah. And
But
no, I agree with you that like they're spending too much money. Like that's not even the issue.
they
And
have to.
one of the fun parts about this is that knowing this again, getting some intel from people who are in Japan and have studied Japan and trade Japan. This particular tax cut is very controversial, and it's
Right.
causing the Kishida government a lot of problems because they know they're behind. The BOJ knows they're behind the inflation curve. Mrs. Watanabe is getting really restless and is looking across the Pacific and seeing that she can get 5.25% on
That's
3-month
right.
money from the U.S. and going, why am I getting 0.8% on 10-month month money?
It's creating capital flight. That's right.
Right. And so they're fearing that. So they have to let this is what started my whole argument that a year and a half ago, I said, Japan is going to let go of yield curve control. Because
Right.
they had to, because inflation was going to happen because we were going to have a commodity cost push inflation round 1 and 2, and Japan was going to get caught in it, and they're caught in it now.
Right. And staying exactly on that point, the bias point intertwined with the actual fiscal comments. The bias point comes in, aside from the whole fact that I can lay bricks, therefore I'm a good piano tuner. And aside from the fact that we're in a bubble that has been right about everything, right? We've been fiscally, not we, you, and me. I mean, we like our little clique of Austrian thinking, libertarian mindset, financial people. We've been right about everything, including stuff that's not financial but related. Things like vaccines and what have you. You and I were talking about that, right? How it's all
Right.
part of this big constellation. But staying with my own bias, identifying my own bias. Aside from the fact that we're in this bubble and all that other horse shit, what happened was when I do my analysis of a situation objectively, I can see both sides. So it's like it's an empathetic disease. I can argue both sides. I can debate
Right.
with myself, and I can do that in every discussion. So, like for example, when you were making your early Eurodollar comments, I didn't push because I wasn't biased. I looked at both sides and I said, you know what, this kind of makes sense. I might have missed this, meaning missing the fact that the Eurodollar is a sponge and that financially Europe is very much dependent on the Fed's behavior, even more than I thought. And I said, you know what, that makes sense. And I put it on like a hat. I mean, let me see. And I started looking at behaviors and stuff out there. And I went, you know what, he's fucking right. This makes sense. This really makes sense. And it really puts PAL and Europe at odds with each other, you know, like the cui bono type of thing. And that all ties in with the whole ideological stuff too. But back to Japan. So that's how I do things when I do it right.
Mhm.
With Japan, presented with the situation, you know, as an analytical person, I'll go, you know, pro and con, then I'll try and argue and I'll look at the evidence to see how it fits in the pro and con thing. I didn't do that with Japan. I went, you know what, these fucking guys, you know, these guys are, I mean, they've been fighting deflation for 30 years. They'll be fighting inflation for 30 years. And I'm influenced by the things that I read. And I have been right about everything, at least in my mind, right? So I'm like, I'm probably right about Japan too. And I'm like, God damn it, I laid bricks for 30 years. I know how to tune a piano. And that's what happened. And so I jumped to conclusions instead of what's the word? A leap of faith and jump to conclusion. And I looked at it, and then I went back and I redid the math. I did the analysis, and here's what I came up with. You know, I'm arguing your case like I'm your pocket protector guy, right? You know, you're the presenting. The bottom line is Japan tried to control the ascent of inflation, but they needed inflation because of the deflationary pass. And the thing that this is where my bias comes in. I think everyone in FinTwit's bias, or whatever it is, X Twitter, XFin, or XFin Twitter, who the hell knows, right? But this is where I think the bias comes in. And the bias comes in when I happen to know pretty well how yield curve control works. And they were allowing the back end to rise at a controlled rate. And by buying the bonds and taking on all comers, they were, you know, quote, keeping a lid on inflation. They were controlling the inflationary rise. And I knew that was a debasement play, because when you buy your own bonds, you have to offset it by the currency gets weakened if the bonds are not allowed to float. So inflation has to come out it either comes out in longer term rates going up to discount and get rid of the inflation, or cash goes to zero because your money is worthless, right? And so and this is where the bias came in. I went, you know what? These guys are doing yield curve control. I know how this works. I know yield curve control. I laid bricks for 30 years. They're idiots, you know, and they may turn out to not be right, but I don't really think they have much of a choice now that I've looked at it. And what I've looked at is they have been fighting deflation forever. They still have economic deflation, but they have the phrase used was cost push. I call commodity inflation, cost push inflation. They have this increased cost push inflation, but they still haven't gotten their economy going the way they need to. And so they need inflation, but they need inflation in a different way. And that's where your fiscal tax stimulus comes in. That's where you're incentivizing. It's like a reverse subsidy. And so now it makes a lot more sense to me. And I say, okay, all right, so why? And then I just said, why didn't they let it happen more sooner? Because that's what's going to happen now. And it turns out, and I have an answer to that, my own answer. I don't know if it's right, but it turns out I think they were just being really, really careful, and they were following the advice of the U.S. Fed. And now they're still following the advice of the U.S. Fed, but now they're like, okay, it's not the end of the world. We can let rates go higher, and we're not going to collapse. So that's where my bias came from. My bias was because of that shit.
Well, that's fine, and that's all fantastic.
I know it's fine.
Now let's get into the nitty gritty of what's happening to Japan. They've got inflation running at 3% or so officially. Oil prices are not backing down. Natural gas prices are not backing down. But the Russians have opened up the northern sea route in order to make it cheaper for them to buy LNG. Of course, the Americans want to shut down the northern sea route, the polar sea route, and now the Biden administration is starting to put pressure on Japan to stop buying LNG from the Russians, and that's been a no-go. Which to the Japanese government, they're like, no, because if we do that, then we don't have an economy. Clearly, that maps in my head to Davos, and trying to stop that move, trying to break Japan off from the U.S. Because again, Davos wants the destruction of the United States, so that's an Obama-style policy. Okay, whereas at the other side of it, you have Powell raising rates, bringing dollars home, creating heat sinks for all the treasuries that everybody's unloading. He knows damn well that Japan has been selling treasuries to mitigate the rise of the yen while they're still doing yield curve control. They sold as much as the Chinese, if not more than the Chinese. At some point, they are then going to start going long U.S. treasuries.
Right.
Okay. And they're going to intervene in the yen market. One of the things that I think is going to happen is that we're going to wake up one day, like Abenomics took, we woke up one day, Abenomics was the law of the land, and the yen, which was trading at 75 back a decade ago, immediately went on a run to 115. Well, guess what? The Bank of Japan it has at any one time like $100 billion or more in actual U.S. dollars cash to dump onto the forex markets and defend the yen and intervene with the yen. And when they do so, they're going to do so hard. They're not going to move the yen from 149 or 150 to 145. No, they're going to move it to 125.
They're going to sell
everybody is going to lose their freaking minds. And they're going to be like, ah! Well, at the same time, the long bond's probably going to go to 1.7 or 2% because they have to do that. At the same time, what's of course going to happen? The Nikkei is going to go ballistic. Because there's going to be a rotation out of JGBs as they're being dumped on the market. They're going to defend the currency, and they're going to defend the currency at home, and then that's going to put upward pressure on the equity markets. There's a rotation trade out of JGBs into equities. There's going to be a reinvestment, domestic reinvestment in Japan, which is exactly what I've been arguing that Powell's doing here in the United States by raising rates to 5.25%. Same friggin' play, guys. Same play.
That's right. And I'm going to tie the Bank of Japan and the U.S. bond market together. I want to add one thing to that, and hopefully a less connected situation. Ideologically, Japan is Western, and I'm not saying they'll be Western forever, but so in that sense, they really don't have a problem with most of the Davos agenda. You know what I mean? They're a little bit woke, but they're also real. And they're in the East, and they need to participate economically with the less expensive LNG. Because if they can't get the less expensive LNG, and that offends the Davos people, then they end up having to sell more U.S. treasuries. So you just can't have it both ways, and that's true. The other thing that I wanted to mention about the bias, not my bias, but people's bias in general. It all comes down to this. If you understand what they're doing at the yield curve control level and what they're changing, and I'm not even getting into the whole fiscal side, just the monetary side of it, it really comes down to when a central bank says, and this is why you can't tell the Japan doom and gloomers they're wrong yet. Okay, this is why they have a leg to stand on, and time will tell if they're right, but I don't think they're right now that I've done the math on this. Okay, so it's like this. The Bank of Japan is allowing inflation to manifest, probably encouraging it as well, but they're doing it at a controlled pace. So that's your yield curve control. Now, whenever a central bank changes their policy by widening the band, was 50 basis points to 100 basis points, or doing what they did last week, which was widening the band and saying they're not going to do it, basically. Basically, they neutered yield curve control last week. That's where I'm starting from. The premise is yield curve control is still there in name, but they're done doing it. And we can get into what that means. But the moment that you do that as a central bank, you give the doomers, and I'm a doomer, right? You give the doomers ammo. The central bank doesn't know what they're doing. The central bank, and so when you change in policy at a central bank level, and the reason that doomness comes out is because these guys act like they're God. They act like their science is a hard science. So when they change their policy, you want to say, you know what? Stop pretending that it's a hard science. It's really a sociology. You work in that shit. So what I wrote to my subscribers on that note, after seeing a couple reports on it, was Now I'm sitting on your side of the table. If Japan does it right, by letting the long-term yield rise, they will stem the money leaving Japan going into US bonds. They will also encourage inflation to be fought at the long end. It'll make monetary policy less relevant in the short term, and whatever they're doing on the fiscal side will work. Now, if you're a doomer or you're just a trader, you go, you know what? These guys don't know what they're doing. Right. So you want the positive result that they want from this, I believe, is they expect the interest rate on the long bond to go up. And in letting the market sources, like they're letting the market fight inflation. And put it this way, they're letting the market fight inflation with rates, and doomers are complaining. Think about that. That's the thing. So as the long rate goes up, and the Japanese bond market finds a more appropriate equilibrium to fight inflation, the yen should strengthen if they do it right. So that's what's going to happen, and so you'll stop the flight of capital. And that's if they do it right. But if you're a doomer or you're a person who's just biased, you just say, "Oh, they don't know what they're doing. I'm going to sell both." Which, by the way, so you can't fully discount people that are negative on it. Because, by the way, I mean, I do fully discount it now, but because when you look at what the UK did, they tried to fix the currency with the bonds, and they both went to shit. So that was the UK, and they're in a far worse situation. And I think maybe they're not in a worse situation, but they are. But
they are in a worse situation because they don't have a decent manufacturing and export economy. The British economy is City of London. The Japanese, on the other hand, they have a lot of really strong manufacturing, exporting businesses and international businesses. I was on with Francis Hunt, the market sniper, a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about this very thing. And we brought up Japan and we were talking about it. And I said, this is what's going to happen. And he said, yeah, that makes sense because they've got the Toyotas and the Hondas and the Sumitomo's and Yokohama and all the, and all of these great companies that are going to just, they're just going to, they've got the weak yen now, and they're going to use that to bolster their export market, their exports, and then they're going to strengthen the currency, and it'll ride back. And the other point on this, and you're right on all that, is that in that environment, they'll be able to manage the inflation. They'll get the commodity inflation, but they'll bust some of the asset inflation. In the same that was encouraged by the zero bound or the negative bound. So
they're increasing productivity with the higher inflation. They're not, it's not like they're just spending more money on oil. They're spending more money on raw materials to make finished goods with a weaker yen that they can sell to other people.
And then allow the currency to appreciate. And by the way, before we did this podcast, I went ahead and I just looked at some of the basic raw numbers on Japan, and they're running a current account surplus. They're running a trade surplus again. They're running they're running all the surpluses that you would expect. Foreign domestic investment, FDI is up over the last year. Why? Because of the weak yen. Blah blah blah. It's all happening. It's all the numbers are right there, and they've all recovered from COVID.
Right.
They're all now in the positive. The trade balance is a little. It's hovering right around zero, but that's fine. It'll start to take off as well, and the numbers are there for them to continue to do what they need to do. And they're net lenders to the world right now, running a 1% to GDP current account surplus. So it's hard to argue. It's hard to argue the doom argument when those numbers are there. Okay. It's a different, and that's the problem that's why the British analogy doesn't work, because the UK doesn't have any of those things, because they never encouraged any re-onshoring to the UK after Brexit, because the Brexit deal was designed to stop any money flowing back into Britain on purpose.
Right. The whole, right. I mean, they're both island nations, but the UK has not done anything to preserve any of their manufacturing, right? So they've outsourced everything. They become a financial colony of the US. I'm kind of that phrase is mine, but I'm definitely thinking about what you have said over that in the past year. or so. And meanwhile, Japan, and here's something, culturally about Japan that I had known since the early 90s, is that I was looking at something called how you make things efficiently. What's that phrase? Krugman was known for it. He actually knew what he was talking about on this. A competitive advantage, right? And Japan made their own rice. They made their own rice, even though rice in Texas was more cost efficient. They could import rice from Texas for a lower cost than they did to grow their own. And they continued to do that to their detriment. But that analogy is they didn't let the core things they needed to survive in this type of situation go away. They didn't outsource everything. So what they did outsource is, at the time, they outsourced their labor to the Tigers, right? The Pacific Rim.
Yeah. And to the Asian Tiger 5. Yes.
Korea and all those guys, like that whole Pacific Rim there. They outsourced it. But now they're in a situation, right? And it's easy to kick them because for 30 years, they've had deflation. And you know what? I'm going to agree with the Chinese guys who say, well, that's because the U.S. made them have their currency stronger than it had to be. It made them effectively tied to the U.S. And now the U.S. is going to let them have their currency weaken. But that's another conversation altogether. But just to bring that home, Japan, they embrace innovation, right? Okay. So, like, for example, I just talked to a guy who works at Aston Martin out of Japan.
Okay.
He said, Toyota, he's an executive there. He goes, Toyota knows, now this is Toyota, right? They're like, Toyota's the shit, in my opinion. I'm starting from that bias, right? Toyota knows they missed the EV boat. In terms of Tesla, right? They know that they've missed that. And that's why whatever's coming next, they ain't gonna miss. And he said this to me a year ago. And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, look at what they're doing. He goes, I don't know that it's going to work, but I do know that they're doing multiple things that are going to innovate. And so those innovations they're big. Whether it works or not, we're not sure. You talk to some people, they're going to hate it. Some people are going to love it. But they're talking about, they're big on the hydrogen, which, the cars blow up and all that stuff. But apparently it's green. We
can have that conversation about whether we think we're going to actually have an EV revolution or whatever's coming next. Personally, I think in 5 years we're all going to be driving. All the ICEs are going to be back on the road again. I had a long conversation with Eric Peters the other day on the last episode of the podcast, and the political revolt here in the United States. If Trump comes back to power, the first thing that will happen is Cap A will go away, and we're already seeing a lot of signs of that. But in general, what Toyota has done, though, and this is where I will agree with you completely, is that they have left themselves, and they have made this abundantly clear: we are going to sell whatever cars people want. And if people want ICEs, we're going to give them ICEs. And if they want hybrids, we're going to give them hybrids. And if they want EVs, we're going to give them EVs or whatever. And Mr. Toyota has been very clear about it.
That's where the Aston Martin thing comes in. And I'm like, well, what's the big deal? The hydrogen. He goes, well, you don't understand. Toyota's going to have the best solid state EV battery. They're just going to do that. And I go, why do you care? He goes, because they're selling them to us to put in our electric Aston Martins. And I went, so Toyota is. Yeah, exactly. Oh, Toyota.
Well, that makes sense.
And now you can see the innovation and the fact that they're an island nation, and so they embrace innovation. Anyway, so Japan love aside, I think they're tied at the waist with the U.S. Fed now, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the Japan dropped their yield curve control effectively like a week after the U.S. long bond soared to 5%.
Sure, it was the right time for them to do that. And I made the call last year when Kuroda, on his way out the door, widened the band to 0.5%, and he did so, and it was a boon to the ECB in the short term, and for most of so far through 2023 to do this, because you're allowing them to now unwind the short yen, long Europe carry trades that were in place, and all all that stuff that was built up over the ZERP and NERP years. Right. And that's fine. And they're doing it. They're not trying to break anything, certainly in Japan. They're certainly not even trying to break Europe all at once. Powell's done enough work to break the Eurodollar system. Now it's a matter of, Japan now gets to act on its own. The way I put it a while ago is I said, when Ueda went to 1%, and said, we're gonna open up the band up to about 1%, but we're not going to tell you how we're going to intervene between now and 1%. That was him turning his whole cards, if this is a game of Texas Hold'em, face down.
Right.
He used to play with them face up.
Right. That, by the way, I don't want to get you off topic, but that, just to put a pin in this concept, that making people guess more is something that Fed started, the U.S. Fed started
the same
last
thing.
year.
Right.
And all that comes back to when Zoltan said about a year and a half ago. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, and then last week, if you extend that metaphor, what Ueda did last week was now he, as opposed to just turning his whole cards face down, now he's actually playing the game as if he knows how to bet. Like, he's using position. He's actually playing the game the way it's supposed to be played. Right. And for a long time, the one at the table that's always benefited from this were the Europeans, because they had the Fed doing the same thing during the ZERP years. And when Draghi was at the ECB, remember Jim Rickards used to say this all the time, is that Draghi's the best central banker on the planet. He says little and does less. Right. He never let anybody know what he was going to do next. He always had that smirk on his face that he wasn't going to, I'm not going to let you know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go do it. And now we have Powell and Ueda doing the same thing. And interestingly, how Powell starts to equivocate and be a little cagey. And I'm not sure if I'm going to raise rates, or I'm not sure if I'm going to do this, or I'm not sure if I'm going to do that. And now everybody's like trying to turn that into a pivot. And that response from the markets last week after Powell's presser was a clear example of people allowing their own biases to run wild in the market, where all Powell did was say, look, dude, I'm not going to tell you whether I'm or not.
I have the same conclusion for different reasons, or almost the same conclusion. The reaction, the market reaction to Powell, which I'm not going to say it's right or wrong, it just is, but I'm going to say that was the first time Powell came across as a little equivocating. And here's the thing. I wasn't sure if he was just being nice, decide to go nice on us, or if he was losing it and going back to his old ways. Well, the market said he's going back to his old ways. We're going to have interest rates lower. And even Hartnett, a guy who really knows his shit, and I read him religiously, thinks that we're going to have a pivot and a panic policy pivot in Q1 of 2024. But you're right. The market went back to its old ways. Remember when he started raising? Right. Oh, he's not going to raise long. It's going to be, we're going to pivot. It's going to break, and everything, little things broke and nothing happened. Yellen knocked on his door asking him to lower rates and nothing happened. SVB went under and nothing happened. I went, well, geez, he really means this to
SVB went under and he raised rates.
Right. Exactly. So, but I mean, when you put those all together, he was determined, for whatever the reason, his legacy or the fact that he cares about America or whatever the reason, but he was, and it took a year for the stock market to break that habit of assuming he was going to ease, right? Yep. And that broken habit came in February and March when things just started coming off this year. And then the market would bounce, but it stopped bouncing violently. So it's okay, the market's getting the point. Powell isn't giving you a put, he's selling calls. And that's what happened to the market. And so here I am thinking, for the last month or two, the market has grown up. It understands that Powell means business. And he has done enough to let the market mature and wring its own stupidity out of it. And then he comes out and he says, maybe this, maybe that. And the market just fucking screams higher. And I go, oh my God, we haven't learned anything.
Let me put a little bit of a point on that because I thought about that. It was the move in the treasury markets that was actually unnerving. The equity markets made perfect sense to me. Right. The move in the treasury markets that was the operation. Because remember, it's like everything else. It's always about bonds. Like, if we're going back to what the great game really is. It's about the old colonialist money wanting to stay in power. The old colonialist money, where do they have all their money? In the sovereign debt of the countries that they believe they control politically. Right. And so they're always going to move the bond markets in such a way as to get them as far away from crisis point as humanly possible. So a 40 basis point move over 48 hours, or roughly 48 hours on the U.S. Treasury curve, and it was literally 40 basis points from peak to trough. And then notice what happened into the Friday close. The US 10-year hit a low of 4.48 and then closed at 4.58
Right.
on Friday. So even that was again, it was an operation, and then nobody really wanted to go in at that level. So the equity markets, so the bond markets were oversold. Some of the central banks probably came in and went, okay, U.S. debt is cheap, and I'm going to start buying a little bit. Remember, I always say that the central banks like to come in on the half of the quarter point, like in order to refill their ammo stores to defend their currencies later. So when U.S. debt gets really cheap, 5%, 4.75, 4.5, pick a number, and they always set up on that. So they set up on 5% on the U.S. 10-year. And then we got a big move down where they just went on a buying spree. Okay, fine. Well, the same thing, of course, then happens in reverse. The Dow got really cheap in the minds of people who are trying to handicap what's happening in the world. So on the November 5th market report I did for the patrons yesterday morning, I got to my last slide, which is always the Dow. And now I've started a new thing I started doing was to look at, well, what did the Dow do this week? Well, it was up 5%. Well, the DAX was only up 3.2%. The Eurostoxx 50 was only up 3%. The NASDAQ was up 6.2%. And the Nikkei was up 3.2%, but then it screamed up like almost 3% today.
Right.
Interestingly, the U.S.-German spread collapsed 16 basis points in this rally, meaning people bought treasuries preferentially over German bunds of the same maturity.
Right.
I mean, just the same way that they bought U.S. stocks preferentially over German stocks.
Right. So our stocks outperformed and our bonds outperformed.
Yes, which is the classic safe haven trade, Vince.
Right. Right.
Classic. This is like Martin Armstrong 101. There's a global crisis. Everything got cheap. And then people went bargain hunting and they looked and they went, yeah, so we're buying U.S. debt. And then Lagarde and company are in there buying German, and the people in Europe who can't get their money out or whatever, they're moving their money around. They have to leave it in there. And I think the SNB was in there. The Swiss National Bank was in there as well, helping things along because, I've got it on good authority that the SNB is really a wholly owned subsidiary of the Bundesbank. So, if the Bundesbank was in trouble, then,
Yeah, the sovereign wealth fund for the Bundesbank.
Exactly. Right. In effect, yes, exactly.
The equity arm of the Bundesbank,
And that's another thing is to remind people is that the Swiss National Bank is the biggest U.S. equity hedge fund hotel in the entire world, or at least it has been.
I thought, I remember that. I remember like, you know what? In the beginning, I was like, we can't really wreck the euro dollar because the Swiss own a lot of stock, and that would wreck them. And then this is about the time that we opened up the line of credit with Switzerland, right around Credit Suisse had its problem as well. And I went, oh, that's right. We're not going to lower rates. We're just going to pinpoint a rescue, and we'll just give money to them, or we'll give money to SVB, or we'll give money to this bank or that bank. We're not going to do wholesale interest rate lowering because we're snipering, to use that word. We're pinpointing the problem, and we're trying to cure it with
targeted
local,
targeted.
That's the word.
A targeted response, which in this case is structure a deal so that Credit Suisse and UBS don't go bank, don't get crushed.
Right. So Swiss National Bank didn't have to puke American stocks. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Can we go? I want to go back to your comment about to the bias thing, right?
Sure.
We were talking about that culture, and you wanted to talk about that, and I want to the biases that I have. So tell me about your biases, or what it is that you wanted to.
Well, my bias is always, trying to figure out how to beat the commies. Like I just live to try and figure out how to beat communists and I see so I have the issue of, if I have a hammer, right, and everything looks like a nail, it's like, how do we kill Lagarde, right? How do we kill Yellen?
Right.
And that's a bias. And I get it. And at the same time, I'm also American, and I don't want to see us, for a variety of reasons, don't want to see us subsumed back into the old European colonial thing. The way I look at things is from the bias, or from the perspective at this point of how does the United States get out of the trap that they're in financially and politically. And that's how I analyze everything at this point. And it's kind of and that's a bias because I may be wrong that anybody's actually trying to do that. And I have to remind myself every once in a while that it isn't all a through line, or it isn't all a linear story. I partner Dexter White yells at me about this stuff all the time. He's like, dude, sometimes things just happen and people just do shit, and you're like,
Right.
yeah, I know, but dude, it's like playing out. And he's like, nope, stop it. And I do the same thing.
Right.
And it's funny that I say I do this knowing full well
Connecting dots that aren't connectable. Right.
yeah, well,
Right.
well, the other thing is that I make
Yeah.
fun of people who draw lines on charts and stuff when I do technical analysis, because I believe
That's right.
that all of that stuff is just reification, where you're drawing art on the candlesticks when the candlesticks are already telling you all the story that you need to know.
Yeah.
Is the way I look
That's
at it,
right.
right? And so yeah,
I agree.
there's that tension is constantly in all of my commentary, and I'm fully aware of it.
So what?
So where do we go from here? I guess is the
You know, I wanted to, if you want, I wanted to touch on the Fed. Well, actually, I really wanted to talk about this nationalism stuff, which is politics. But I don't know if you want to talk about it.
I mean, no. I mean, we've covered all the events. We've covered all the stuff that I ultimately wanted to cover. So we're into the. By the way, this is the awkward pause portion of the podcast where we try and figure out how we're gonna finish this thing off, which is fine, and I'm okay with that. Like I was just happy to like update what's going on in the gold market, like we talked about the last time you were on the show. Vince was on in episode 154, and we put forth this novel. Not novel idea, but just this look at what's happening within the gold space, because I think it ties into all this stuff anyway, right? Which is so what's
isn't it interesting?
Okay,
Yeah.
so go ahead.
Yeah,
I mean, because when we finish setting this up, just to remind everybody that what we were talking about in episode 154 was that, and what was the inciting incident for that podcast was that there's an arbitrage opportunity between Shanghai gold and London or COMEX gold that isn't closing, right? That Shanghai is continually running positive price spread over what you can get over in the West. And Matt, set Vince's prodigious brain off going, is this the return of mercantilism? And then we did an hour and 20-minute podcast. And for anybody who's interested in that, in a finer point on it, you should absolutely listen to that one, because Vince was on fire that night. And
okay.
But so let's get an update on what's going on. What do you think, what you're seeing there?
Okay. All right. So this is, I'd forgotten all about that. I've been so obsessed about this other weird stuff that I'm looking at. But okay, so there's a good continuity from that. The Shanghai premium, right? And if you're looking at it as an arbitrager, right, we're waiting for it to close. And it's either going to close or persist, right? So if it closes, it's either going to close higher or lower, meaning our price will go to their price, or their price will go to our price. And so in that sense, if you look at the Shanghai spread to the U.S., it's very similar to an EFP. It's very similar to a premium for locality, or a convenience premium is what we would call it, using an energy analogy. What happened? What happened was after the podcast that we did, gold rallies on a 3-week period, and the Shanghai premium comes in. So the premium still exists. But the premium is a thing now. It's got its own life, meaning it's something you look at as an indicator of direction or of supply and demand dynamics in the market. So what I mean by that is the premium gets as high as, 5%, let's say 6. And then you wait and you say the premium has to close. It either closes or it doesn't. If it does close, I just said how it could close, right? If it doesn't close, then someone takes the metal out of the US and brings it to China. Now, who can do that? Not many people can do that. But I have it on, it's cliche to say, but it's true. I have it on multiple good authorities that between 2 and 4 weeks ago, China took delivery of US gold.
Really?
Yeah. Now, the one person who told me is a person based out of China. The other person, I'm not going to say her name, because everyone knows who she is, but I have the proof from one of her posts. And she said, I was looking into this problem with something in gold, and I'm not going to say what the problem is, I'll give it away. She said, but I talked to a friend of mine, and it turns out the arbitrage is being taken out of because China's taking delivery. Are they taking delivery out of are they going, China's going, Z's going, I want COMEX gold? No, it doesn't work like that. It works like this. An American bank has a relationship with China, and they buy. So I'm saying this, that I have it on authority from 2 reliable, disparate sources. They don't know each other. That China over the last month has taken physical gold out of New York, out of the COMEX, and put it there. And this, if you want to do a dot connection, number one of the sources is pretty reliable. They're a hedge fund manager out of Asia, and the other source, I would have to say, in these type of market structure things, is unimpeachable, because of her. I think her knowledge of these markets. She's not a tourist in gold. Let's put it that way. Okay, so what happened is the gold got taken out of the U.S. And I'm telling you a story here, but it's true, right? Gold got taken out of the U.S. to replenish gold that was taken out of the Chinese vaults. China had a minor run at the SGE a month and a half, 2 months ago, where a lot of gold was taken out locally. It didn't leave the country, but it was taken out, and they're trying to prove that their exchange is physical by letting people take it out. They're showing off now. That's what they're doing. And they're also doing it for their BRICS partners. They're like, you can put your gold in here. You can take it out. Watch, I'll show you. They're demonstrating. It's like, maybe it's three-car Monte, but we don't know about that yet. Here's how it works as a trader, right? When the ARB gets big enough, or there's enough volume on the ARB where you can make enough money, you close the ARB. So you let the ARB breathe for 5 contracts at 2%. You slam the ARB at 5,000 contracts at 5%. You let it take, it's fishing. You let it set, you let the hook set, right? And you make sure that it's worth your while, because there's transportation costs. When you look at what's happened in the Chinese vaults, when you look at what's happened on their 75% of their metal was pulled out in the last 2 months in gold. 26% of it was pulled out in silver. So that's a vault that's actually being used as what we talked about, a toll booth. It's a way station on the way to somewhere else. Okay, so the gold, China says you can take your gold out. They take it out, right? And now U.S. gold is a step, not obviously, but it's making its way to China in a more direct sense, A to B, right? So that's a U.S. bank, Bank of America, JP Morgan, one of those banks that's handling China like a customer. Now, I'm not saying the U.S. government doesn't know about it. I'm saying that the U.S. government has to be told about it. Right. And they know about it, and that's fine. And so after this metal got transferred over, the spread collapsed because the COMEX rallied, right? And Shanghai rallied too, but the spread came in as it rallied. And then the bond market stabilized. I was like, this is all like, it's all tied together. But I think what we're seeing is when the ARB gets big enough, when there's enough metal out there available to close the ARB, JP Morgan or a big bank will close it. And that's because China is their customer. That's it. So it's really happening.
And that's great. I really appreciate you updating us on that, because I wasn't following this at all. I was trying to decide whether or not we were all going to get nuked, and right, exactly. I have to go where the story goes, and keep all the plates spinning, and then every once in a while it's like, no, that's why you have guests and friends now. Right. Exactly. This is why you cultivate relationships with people in various aspects of the market, so you can talk about these things. So it's like that. So no, that's great. So it's telling us exactly what we already suspected, which is that gold is coming back to the monetary system in some way, in some substantial way. And then we can get theoretical about where how long it's going to take for certain things to happen and whatnot. But it's like, one of the things is to kind of wrap up the entire process here, the entire story, is that when you presented with information that feels discordant or it's completely outside your frame of reference, and somebody goes on Twitter and says something, you're just like, it's so fucking stupid. Like, well, really? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Right. Have you thought about this? I'm not trying to, you can call me an idiot and you can call me whatever you want, and that's fine. But here's, if you want to have a serious conversation, then in Twitter, we'll have a serious conversation for, very small values of serious. 140 character serious conversation. Exactly. The 280 character version of the word serious. Right. But, at the end of the day, what's important is that we keep constantly throwing those ideas into the space to chew them over and to make them, we're gonna all like connect too many dots on a day on any random Thursday because that's what we do, right? And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You're going to be right about some of them. You're going to be wrong about others. But it's the only way you ever figure out what the actual story is by going ahead and throwing something up at the wall and then seeing if you can make the hypothesis work. And if you can, great. And if you can't, well, okay, well then you'll learn something else along the way. And it's that, for me, it's the scientist training. It's like nothing will teach you, that you're wrong faster than doing real honest to God science with real honest to God chemistry. Like you're like, oh yeah, this is way more than I ever thought it was, because there's so many other competing reactions and things you hadn't controlled for and variables you didn't think were important and blah, 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 blah.
Abstractions and biases get in the way of the reality of it. But yeah, I mean, the gold Shanghai ARB is there for real now. And that means someone's taking advantage of it. And now it should be watched. Like, for example, if the Shanghai gold ARB goes to 5% and then collapses down to 1% from the US market collapsing and the Shanghai market collapsing more, well, then you know who's in control. That's really what it's about. Who's in control, supply and demand? Who was the weaker hand? I wanted to bring up, and this is like totally in your ballpark, and I think your listeners would appreciate this. This is tied to Davos, okay, with the Davos mindset. I saw, I'm cracking. I saw, a couple, bits of information about flags being taken down. I'm not talking about the Israeli thing. I'm talking about a British flag not being allowed to wave. It had to be put behind a barricade. And I went, you know what? If that was a Palestinian flag, it would be allowed to. If that was, anyway. So that's the obvious hypocrisy there. But then I thought about it in a Davos way, and from a European perspective, not aligning with them. Okay, I'm speaking like I'm a WEF Davos person, or what do you call it, a Biden junta, right? The WEF junta in the Biden. Okay, I'm speaking on their behalf. I am a European. Nationalism is what ruined us. It's what happened. It's why we had World War I. Nationalism was the result of the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsing, and nationalism and nationalistic pride is what forced us to have a war. And World War II was really an extension of World War I, and it was even more nationalistic. Therefore, as a European, I recognize that nationalism is evil. In fact, in the 60s and 70s, I'm going to create a language called Esperanza and try and get everyone in Europe to speak it, because we don't need differences. We need unity. I'm deathly afraid of World War III. I'm bringing this. This is, by the way, this is all going to tie to what's happening right now in the U.S. and in Europe. And so I'm not calling myself communist. I just want something bigger. I want something bigger than national. It's like a John Lennon song. Imagine, I want everything to be unified. And when that, and I have convinced most of my people that way. So when another ethnic group comes in, a new immigrant, whether it be whoever, it doesn't matter who it is, but they're coming in, I'm going to let them express their national pride because I'm woke. That's the bad part of this. And I'm also going to prevent the nationalistic pride of the British flag being waved. And I went, okay, that's me. And I'm like, I already had that in my mind. And I looked at the US and I went, why do they hate Trump? And all the other reasons aside, Trump is a nationalist. And I don't mean that in a negative way at all.
Right.
Okay. The U.S. in the current administration is trying to keep us together without being nationalistic, meaning be proud, but don't be American proud. Be proud of workers, be proud of this. And I'll bring this whole new thesis of mine to bear right now with nationalism. If you look at the world throughout history, whenever you have complex ideologies that run it, communism, very abstract, very idealistic. When you had communism in Russia and China, you had a far left ideology. And when it didn't work, when the abstractions don't work, you need to keep your society together. And what did China use to keep your society together? Nationalism. Okay. What did Russia use after USSR fell? Nationalism, right? So these Eastern countries are working off a nationalistic pride. Right. In the West, using Europe as our focal point, not the US, even though the US is part of it, right? We're so deathly afraid of nationalism that we're repressing it so unhealthy. And if you repress something in such an unhealthy way and you don't let people just be a little bit proud of who they are, I mean, isn't that what the Olympics is about? Mm-hmm. It's about different nations celebrating their difference and then competing in a healthy way, right? We're saying, let the Chinese be proud of who they are, but you can't. We're not proud of being Americans. Nationalism is the path, and this is where they go. The Europeans think nationalism inevitably leads to fascism because of the first two world wars. And I'm saying, based on my little Freudian background, I'm saying that if you repress nationalism too hard, it comes back.
Oh, yeah.
As fascism. And that's where we are now. So in using the US as an example, if you don't let us become proud to be Americans again in a healthy way, if you don't let a little dose of that come back, if you don't let that come out a little bit, you're going to pave the road for some Orwellian fascist guy to get elected, not Trump, someone really bad,
You're going to, like, this is what Frank Herbert talked about in Dune. You're going to create the Fremen.
The what? I'm not familiar with.
Okay, so so this is the story of Dune. 10,000 years of extracting the spice from Arrakis and beating down the native population for 10,000 years and making them harder and 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 literally driving them underground and drinking, and reclaiming their own sweat in order to survive in the desert and everything else. And you make them into fanatical, rabid,
right,
ultra tribal jihadists.
Right. It can go religious. It can go nationalistic.
And then there's all the other things that go along with what Herbert was talking about in Dune, with how the Bene Gesserit created a false religion and all this stuff, right? But what's important is that if you've seen Dune 1, the first one, and you haven't watched the second one yet because it hasn't come out yet, you don't know the story, how it ends. I can tell you how. It's not, no spoilers. This is a 50-year-old story. The Fremen win and go on a complete rampage around the galaxy and kill everyone. They go on a rampage and destroy the other houses. They go on a fucking jihad and kill billions, hundreds of billions across the galaxy of all of their oppressors from all the other houses and all the other, so it's a spacefaring civilization.
Right.
They get control of all of it. And the thing that Paul's story is, Paul sees that and comes to terms with the fact that he can't stop it because once it awakens, he can't. All he can do is ride it and try and mitigate as much damage as he can. So he has to embrace the role after he says no to it because he recoils in horror from what he sees in his early visions of this, and then he has to embrace the role, and then and then his story, and then all he's trying to do after that is trying to mitigate the amount of damage that gets done in his name after that. And this is this story is as old as and so to your point, yes, that's part of the argument. What I really think Davos is trying to do is to continue to be the emperor and the Harkonnens and keep everything running and keep control of quote unquote the spice. And that's what they're trying to do. And whether the spice is oil or the Eurodollars or whatever you want to call it, it's all the same. It's all the same thing.
Oh, no, you're right. It's the qui bono, qui malo stuff, what you talk about all the time. Mm-hmm. I'm giving you the psychological thing. Basically, Europe, the good Europeans, are fighting the last war. And they're going to create the next enemy the way they're fighting the last war. And the flip side, the other part of it is what you're saying. Everyone acts in their own interest. And these people are really pretty ignorant of how self-centered they are. They want to preserve themselves at the top of the pyramid. And they'll tear down a civilization to do it.
Yeah, they will. And this is what bothers me with the response to the Hamas attack on October 7th. Is that they immediately went to, we need to pivot and go kill Iran. The same way that after they got us to ready to go to war after 9/11, they pivoted, and it was Saudis that flew planes into the into the World Trade Center, but we went and attacked Iran and Afghanistan. Why? Well, because that was the plan that was on the shelf, and then all we had to do was fabricate it. And at least then they took 18 months to figure out how they can sell it to us because they had us angry. This they're trying to do the shit in 18 days. And
Right.
Again, I'm watching this and I'm like, oh, you people, they didn't even wait 18 hours. They already pulled Plan R off the shelf, and I'm of course using Plan R, making a Dr. Strangelove reference. Like they pulled Plan R off the shelf, and and now we're going to nuke Russia. Like that's where, or in this case, we're going to go to war with Iran, and they're moving the assets that we're moving into theater. Just like they can leave so many potential tripwires for the worst thing imaginable to happen. And then when you start going back to all the things you and I talked about in this podcast about the fiscal and monetary policy of these very pivotal countries, the US, Europe, Japan, and how Japan is, I think, in many ways now, if I'm right about this, and I'm not saying I am, but if I'm right, and Japan is actually acting as the Fed's wingman to allow U.S. nationalism to express itself in both monetary and fiscal policy, then their next response is, well, we need to start a war.
Oh, I didn't think
because they don't have any other options. That's what's been scaring the crap out of me, Vince, for 2 years.
Right. Well, that's right. How do you motivate your base? Right. Exactly. If you're, for example, like in the U.S., if your woke ideology is failing, and we're seeing it fail everywhere in terms of keeping people together, vaccines were a problem, the inherent contradictions within the whole, debate between being tolerant of other people and then having those other people, cut your nose off, like the contradictions are making the woke ideology, or let's just call it political correctness, run amok, collapse. And and this is my point, if it collapses, and it's collapsing now, right? Mm-hmm. If it doesn't collapse in an orderly fashion, you need to replace it with something else to keep your people cohesive. And that cohesiveness is nationalism. And what you're saying is, wouldn't it, these fuckers
could in their best interest
nationalism back by invading someone? I'm like, oh,
it's in their best interest to stoke that in a self-destructive way to get us to fight a war we can't afford, so that they don't lose, so that the capital runs during the war to them, not to us.
Right.
That's been my argument for the last 3 years, honestly, which is that the goal here is to manufacture a scenario. This is why Europe is okay with Ukraine winding down, by the way, because now we have to create an island of calm and inevitability and rational. This is why the European leadership always acts as if they're above it all, and that we want peace, we want this, we want that, while they're stoking the Americans to go off like Rambo without a jockstrap and go bomb Iran and get involved in a war that we can't afford.
Right. We are the policemen.
And then we turn into clown world here. We have political division. The election, nobody accepts the results of the 2024 election. There's the potential for states wanting to secede, and all sorts of weird crap is going to happen. And what's the goal? Capital will flee to where it is treated best, not well, just best. And so what the Europeans are trying to set up is an island to have all the capital run back to them.
It's like all of Europe.
I think they're going to fail, by the way.
So all of Europe, in a sense, wants to become Switzerland, meaning they want everyone to keep their money there. It's like
they just don't want the money that's there to leave. And and what we're seeing in and why I brought up what happened last week after the Powell pivoted, and we had the preferential move into U.S. assets as opposed to European assets.
Right.
Tells you that the market's not buying that for a moment because, well, Germany is deindustrializing and blah, 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 blah.
Germany is so deindustrializing. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's like every country in the world, every country in the G7, you're bringing up, like every country in the G7 is being hit with some sort of strife, whether it be immigration, whether it be deindustrialization. I mean, Germany's like saying, sure, you can leave BASF, just, go to China if you want. I'm like, what the hell's going on here? It's like they're pushing them out. know.
I had dinner with a couple of people here last night. I hosted a couple of people over here and a couple of people from Canada, and we were talking about one from Western Canada, and we were talking about this, and like there's a good old fashioned tax revolt going on in Saskatchewan right now, where
Really?
where the premier of Saskatchewan just told all the companies to stop paying the carbon tax.
Really?
And Alberta and Saskatchewan. So Saskatchewan is now drafting onto the lead of Alberta. Alberta is now saying, "Look, we produce all the oil, we produce all the tax revenue. You guys
Right.
suck it all back into Ottawa and Toronto, and we're done with that, and we're done with all of this stuff. And it's tough. We're not doing it anymore." And I've been targeting that Alberta, Saskatchewan as the break point for Canada for years because
So
what's Trudeau and company trying to do? Stop them from producing hydrocarbons, and it's been going on for 10 years.
I see. I'm not that literate in this stuff. So basically, there's the civil war is being fought over ultimately because of the carbon and the woke versus the non-woke. It's being fought over natural resources.
Always.
It's crazy, right?
Always.
But within the country, like we're having these manufactured fights over left and right, blue and red, and they're having Midwest versus the coasts, and they're having natural resource fights. Thank God we don't have those yet.
Yeah, just remember this.
Yeah.
Look around the world and who's actually trying to institute particular policies, and then ask yourself, are they hydrocarbon producers or consumers?
Oh, of course.
And there you go. And that's why the climate change thing has always been run out of Europe, because Europe doesn't produce hydrocarbons anymore.
Right.
So they need alternate sources of them, and that's why the Biden administration's policy towards Israel is a mess. And that's another podcast. But and it's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here tonight. But there's so many other angles on all of this, and Joaquin Flores and I touched on this a little bit while in the episode he and I did recently. You might want to listen to that. So there you go. Like that's where I think we are. But it all comes down to check your premises at the door, folks. Ayn Rand wasn't wrong about everything. She wasn't wrong about ever. She was absolutely right about this. Always and ever check your premises. You may find you're not right, at all, because you're not an expert, because you woke up the other day and read an article.
Right. Which goes back to like the bias, right? Your premise is your bias. Exactly. Mm-hmm. And my premise is I'm smart, and my premise is Japan, and maybe they don't know what they're doing, but not for the right reasons. So now I'm looking at it that way, which is what it's all about. And I'm careful about biases and premises. And you have to know you have to know where you're coming from.
Right.
I'm doing it for my own self-interest. You need to know that.
Of course. So, well, Vince, this has been an absolute blast, as always. I'm really glad we got a chance to talk about this stuff, because it is fun. I think it's really important, people look to experts to try and figure out what's going on. And when experts can actually, and I hate to even put myself in that category, but people who those listening to this podcast, you're doing so because you think I'm an expert and I bring experts on. Well, guess what? We all try to understand our own limitations as much as we possibly can. And we, of course, expect the audience to, call us on our bullshit, because it's really important.
I think, just to add to that, everybody has answers that are called experts. And I think these people are holding themselves out as experts, but they're not asking the right questions. And one of those questions is, what is your premise? What is your bias? Who benefits? Who doesn't benefit? And it's my goal when we have these conversations to ask the right questions and to figure out if we're fighting the right war, the right problem, whether it be, for example, gold versus fiat, that type of stuff. And I know how that works. I know how that ends, but we need to ask the right questions. So, and then help people think for themselves. Okay. So they can add to the conversation rather than us being, what's the word? What's that word where you're,
the philosopher kings who the shamans,
philosopher king. Yeah,
the shamans and the guild leaders who dispense wisdom from on high. No, dude. Exactly. We're trying to just figure it out, just like y'all are, and that's what this is all about.
I don't want to be the guy with the good idea that keeps coming back and doing the same good idea all the time. I want to do more stuff.
If we're not if we're not doing a continuous improvement thing at every level all the time, then we're doing it wrong. Like that's the point. That's the point of being alive. So, all right, Vince, we'll call it here, man. So everybody, you can follow Vince over at his Substack. So Vince, do the thing, do the self promotion thing as you deserve.
Gold Fix is the newsletter that I have, and basically it's extremely focused on precious metals and things related to that in that constellation, inflation, economics, and it also talks about commodities. And we have some pointed research that we give to premium subscribers. If you're interested, it's
that'll do. So you can, it's a goldfix@substack.com.
Yeah, it's like VBL. Goldfix at Substack, something like that.
Something like that. Okay.
Goldfix Substack. There's a link I'll give you, something like that.
And it'll be in the show notes, folks, because, because Vince and I are peas in a pod. We're both really not great at self-promotion. So with that said, Vince, you have a great night. We'll wrap up again. We'll talk again soon.
Yes, we will. We'll have to come back and visit these again.
Of course. Absolutely. All right, man. You be well.
Peace.
Well, that'll about wrap it up for episode 161 of the Gold Coats and Guns podcast. I want to thank Vince, as always, for showing up and doing the thing. And I'm still reeling from the story about the piano tuning and the plastic on the furniture and whatnot. Y'all just don't know if you like growing up in that culture. It's just hilarious. So with that said, I'm out. As always, you can follow my blog over at tomluongo.me. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. You can sign up for the Patreon at Patreon/Gold Goats and Guns, where you can sign up for the private podcasts and blog posts or the monthly newsletter with all original material and a full portfolio to try and help you make sense of how to profit from the chaos. So with that said, I'm out. You guys be well. You take care. We'll talk soon. And keep your stick on the ice.